Welcome to our home. Join Michael Voss and me, Jay Staker, to hear and see how the book of Acts is continuing today. We will share stories and leadership insights from across the global network. We want you to see and hear the progress of leaders all over the world that believe in following the patterns of Acts so that you too can participate with us. Michael, I'm really looking forward to our conversations today, and I think when we get started, you'll know why.
All right.
You'll catch on right away what I'm excited about.
All right.
As we climb back into our chairs and share the opportunity to communicate with our audience about, report on what's been going on, this is an exciting month. And I want to start with harvest. And,
harvest. Okay.
It's always in my mind, both the harvest metaphorically, but of course, the literal harvest that you're just coming out of. And thank you for letting me to come down and spend the day on the farm and ride with you and experience, working with you and your father and actually handpicking some corn. I haven't done that in a few years. And seeing the bounty of your harvest. But I want to put it in perspective because it's just not about raising corn. It's not about just the farming itself. It's much deeper than that because this is your tent-making reality. And so let's talk about the perspective of your role as a farmer and how that impacts your life work and what it means to you. And I'm thinking of, this last Sunday up front, I was talking about the role of a farmer coming out of the Petrine Circle. And you're called for special things as a farmer. But the farming metaphor is all through the teaching, the hard work it talks about. And I know how hard the work is, but I know it's enriching. So talk to us about your experiences and why you do this and what it means to you, but then also related to your work beyond the farm.
Yeah. So I grew up on a farm, raising crops and raising animals, cows and pigs in particular.
I can't believe you still don't raise cattle.
Yeah,
They're
I know.
wonderful creatures.
No, you love the animals. They're a lot of work every day. But it was, and I learned the value of hard work. And I also learned the value of a community, a small community that comes around each other, knows each other, helps each other out with all things. And also the importance of a strong relationship with my parents. Just the value of having that throughout your life, being able to work hand in hand, side by side. And so as life has continued on, we've continued to, with the help of all of you around me, the older generation around me, helping me continue to prioritize that legacy of 5 generations of farming.
Legacy, that's a good word to describe it.
And so I think that's the first part of who are you, we may ask, and we may, in our culture, we may say our name, we may say our job, we may say our title, but that's not who are you. And I'm thinking of my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents, who are all buried in a particular similar region. So that's the first thing. It's part of just where God placed us. Second, to the whole idea of the scriptures are full of agrarian agriculture metaphors. It was an agrarian culture that they were in many different places. So the whole idea of a bountiful harvest and that we are workers gathering up Christ's harvest. So fitting and so real to me because that's what I'm engaged in a yearly time. Third, I would say, again, through the understanding of especially Paul's letters, that we're not an employee of a church. The church is not a business, and it doesn't have staff and employees. It has leaders and shepherds to care for it like a crop, like a farmer cares for its crop. And so part of me continuing to be in agriculture and a farmer is to have work that can help support me financially, help support my family financially, and even benefit, because we had a few of the, one of the guys in particular that helped in the harvest season. So it gives a place for employment and for them to work hard and learn things. So
when
it's really important as church leaders, I think, to not, and for the church to not view you as an employee, and for you to not view yourself as an employee. That's a Western construct of business on top of the church. And it's not Christ's family. It's not Christ's design. So the more we can be as leaders self-enterprising, I think is better for us individually and for us as a church.
Well, in your orientation, I know I told you this. I got there and you were down across the 40, down the bottom of the hill. And I walked out to the top hill where you're working. I was just looking out across the landscape, and the beauty was overwhelming. And this time of year, but you're embedded deep in creation and really experiencing bounty, but also beauty. And embedded in that day, you had two fathers with you on the farm, but you're working hard, but in a setting that's so encouraging and so enriching. So you come back exhausted. Can you help people understand what it's like to, as a farmer? Other people have the work that they're wired for, that God prepared them for, but it's clear that you were prepared to be a farmer. How does that affect your soul when you're out in that field harvesting your season of hard work?
Yeah, nature, and how nature really continuously speaks of God's design. It continuously shows God's beauty. It continuously puts us in a position of knowing we're not in control. We can tend to the crop. We can weed the crop. We can fertilize the crop. We can manage the crop, but we can't make it grow, and we can't stop storms. We cannot control the weather. Farmers tend to complain about too much rain. They complain about too little rain. They complain about too hot and too dry. They complain about prices being too low, because all of those things are out of their control, or out of our control. And ultimately, it really continuously humbles you, but also gives you a confidence that God is real. He has a design for us, and we are to enjoy the fruits of our labor. What is man? I think of Ecclesiastes 9. Everything is vanity, but then so what is man to do? Enjoy your wife, enjoy your food and drink, and enjoy the work that God puts in front of you. And to me, out in where it's a clear blue sky, it's a cornfield, and the rolling hills. What a beautiful landscape that God's given us to remind us of all those things every day.
And you briefly touched on it, but you also see it as an enterprise, not just for your biological family, but you brought one of your church sons and one of our emerging leaders down, employed him so he can learn, that same experience as you.
Yep.
What benefit do you see that giving the next generation by working side by side with you in the field?
Oh my, 8 weeks of 80-hour weeks of 6 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night, and full throttle, hard work, focused, all of that entire time. I mean, it is a tough. The first couple of weeks you're okay, but by week 3 and 4 you're really beginning to drag. But the weather does not wait. The weather doesn't wait, and so tomorrow the snow could fly, the big storm could come, and in 6-7 months of growing season of harvest could be gone. And so you're always, until it's done, you've got to work hard at it. So working side by side of it's an apprenticeship. It's on the job training, and to have our sons in the church family to be part of that, it's just invaluable, because again, you're working side by side with each other. I mean, we talked about so many leadership things. We talked about we would make jokes side by side with each other on the radio. We do things, and then it'd transition to serious, very, very serious topics, just in a natural conversation. And so just having that amount of time together with another person is valuable.
Yes, and that sense of, in the context of hard work. And I know I was waxing nostalgic on my drive home about, 60 years ago, standing shoulder to shoulder with my father at harvest, and I remember being so cold and shaking, and I still look back on that so warmly and so fondly of the lessons I learned and the value it brought. So thank you for helping us understand that world. And it's a good reminder for us, whatever work we do, that's how we should view it. And that enjoy the work of our hands. And
the work that God's put in front of us, do it with all your might. Do it with everything you've got.
And there's something great for your soul to fall into bed after a hard day's work, knowing I worked hard today and I
did what I could today. I'm completely exhausted. I've given it all, my all. Rest.
Shift now. Let's talk about the Petrine Circle that we spent just the other day we started this. It's been a while. But I've told you before that I struggle with understanding the context and what the fine granular meaning of the Petrine Circle teachings were. They just didn't make sense, and I hadn't dug into them in the way we need to understand them in light of the way of Christ's apostles and what Peter and James and Jude were trying to accomplish with their writings. I know it's had a big impact on you and some of the papers you've written, theological essays out of that. But I think especially around the paradigm, 2 Peter and Jude have huge influence on the paradigm. And speaking for myself, it was huge impact on my understanding the paradigm with richness. I had the framework from Paul, but if we adorn it with more of what came out of the Petrine Circle, it just gets richer and richer and equips us, in this case, to be ready to face the trials that we're dealing with, the Jewish church was dealing with. So paradigm insights from what you brought away from that teaching.
Yeah, boy, it has been so rich, hasn't it?
Oh, it's unbelievable.
It's been a great journey to continuously tie ourselves to the scriptures. Let's define Petrine Circle. We're talking about a collection of letters that are in Peter's influence and circle. So you've got James, you got 1st and 2nd Peter, we've got Jude, we got Hebrews. That's the Petrine Circle of letters, or Peter's associates. So then second, particularly when we look at 2 Peter, the first part of 2 Peter is really just a bit of what we're talking about right now. He starts out in this first argument and he says, you need to live effective lives. Do your best to live skillful and fully effective lives. And he's really building on what he said in 1 Peter, which is you have to have solidarity in the community by getting around the teachings. Then he refers to Paul's letters being hard to understand at times, which some people will twist. But nevertheless, they are Scripture. They are God-breathed, they're Holy Spirit inspired, and it's the apostles' teachings from Christ.
And it makes it very clear that's
he's making a strong argument that we need to work hard at these things. And he says in the last part, in that same last part of 1 Peter, he's saying you have to build a complex state of mind. So, which is similar, but quite a bit richer in the sense compared to what Paul is talking about in Romans 12, 1 and 2, which is the renewing of your mind. Mm-hmm. Put off the old, put on the new. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But now let's get to 2 Peter. So in that argument, Peter then is saying, live effective lives, live fruitful lives. And then he gives this little taxonomy where you it's in a lot of songs and and we've made a lot of like posters and what little cliches kind of out of it. But if you read it in its full context of all the letters of what the Petrine Circle of letters are trying to do, of help you build a complex mind, it's actually teaching you how to love. And so it says you have to have goodness, you have to have knowledge, you have to seek to know, you have to inquire, you have to have self-control of yourself, you have to have mastery of yourself, mastery of your emotions, endurance, the power to withstand hardship, godliness, you have to be disciplined is a range of what that means. And then it talks about love, but a level of love called Philadelphia love, a love of brotherly love. And then finally is agape love, which is a deeper love. And so the richness of that, knowing that we can't just say to one another, hey, we just need to love more. But that's a good sentiment, but it's not. But what does that mean? How do we as humans actually love each other more? In 2 Peter, Peter's making the argument, build a complex state of mind, and part of how you love one another is to build these and to live effective lives. You have to build these things into your life: goodness, knowledge, self-control, endurance, godliness, discipline. And you have to do that all around the teachings with each other. It's just a beautiful and simple to understand, hard to implement in our lives throughout them. But
when you think of the context they're in, where Jewish churches were under attack from culture, they were under attack from their people.
They were in a double bind. That's what James explicitly says it, right? They're in a double bind. And they're in that attack from the culture and attack from their own Jewish traditions, the religious tradition of the day. And
very similar to what we face today with Christendom and the way of Christ and the apostles. And one of the things that was so powerful out of the teaching over the months is that love is very practical. Asking for wisdom, very practical, but that practicality of it, and the application that we have right now, that sense of, what do we do with people that are being sucked back in or being broken by that pressure coming from the outside world? So it's very applicable. I know around the world, leaders that you work with are facing that very pressure.
Yeah.
So huge impact.
Yeah, it is a direct hit. The whole Petrine Circle is a direct hit for where we are. Our culture is moving against Christendom more and more, not listening to Christendom values, Christendom leaders, and then even in our own paradigm Christian circles, we're fighting against those paradigms that tell us what to think instead of how to think and build a complex mind, like Peter's talking about. Jay, we have to mention Jude.
I was say, in all this pressure, you'd think we would shrink and try to keep a low profile, but that's not what Jude tells them to do.
Isn't that? It is so insightful, confidence inspiring. It's you call them paradigm insights. Mm-hmm. It's an insight. Jude is saying that we have to help each other contend for the faith. Contend for it. Contend is it's not a word that's used often in the New Testament, the Greek word of it, but it means to struggle for, to fight for, to work together for. So that word pulls in that solidarity part that 1 Peter, the last section of 1 Peter is talking about. It's just what a perfect puzzle that God's laying out. But you have to contend. And so there's this little simple chart, 3-step chart about we have to believe in the faith. That's the first major step, believing, receiving it, and understanding it. The second part is beginning to understand the difference between Christendom patterns and the way of Christ and his apostles, the patterns that the New Testament is actually teaching. Church is a family, church has social structure, that knowing the difference that church is not an institution, church is not an organization, church is a family. And then the third is really helping each other and helping, especially when we talk about our youth, helping them understand that we need to contend for the faith. Well, all of us, and not just our youth, but we've been talking in our particular circle about,
especially
about
with third gen and our big folks.
Yeah, but that's Jude's argument to all of them. That, I mean, they're getting pushed aside. People are against them in their own religious people, and in the culture are xenophobic against them and giving them no voice. And he's saying, gird up, build a complex mind. And Jude is saying, contend, and struggle for the faith. Don't give up.
Well, you actually said, as you're sharing that, something that really resonated, that Jude wrote to inspire. And if you think about that word, what it really means is he's breathing life into them where they're feeling lifeless, helpless, trapped. He breathes life back into them to give them the energy, the courage, the faith, the strength to contend.
Yeah. This is 40 years later. I mean, Jesus said he's going to come back. They begin to understand in these 40 years that the church and their gatherings around a meal and them being a family is Christ's design for the gospel to go to the ends of the earth. They are understanding that. But their Jewish and Hebrew brothers and sisters are saying to them, listen, Jesus isn't coming back. He didn't come back. And so you just as well give it up. You just well give it up. Just go back and come back to these traditions that are our heritage and
comfortable, feel safe. Yeah.
And this is where the apostles in their letters, which were saved by the Spirit for us today, lay the framework for us to operate. And that is, we need to contend for the faith. We need to contend for the patterns of church as your family. Christ is building his kingdom with churches as families all over the place. It's a multiplication of churches.
And it's so easy to be seduced by those secondary traditions, or in this case, the Jewish traditions, to pull back in to feel safe and comfortable. And it's like going home to mommy, to feel that arms around you. But it's all false. It's a false offer. And a sense of contending. We had the privilege a couple of weeks ago to have leaders from all around the world join us on our leaders teaching Sunday morning. And contend is what they were talking about. Report on that what was the message that you wanted them to share and that we heard?
So God is raising up leaders. He's raising up people all over the world are saying, we want to get, we know what we don't want, but we're unclear on what we do. And we don't want a big institutional church. We want church as family. We want church as we have leaders that we've been working with. So we had some Latin American leaders. We had some from Albania, Kosovo that were on a recent trip. It was just the activity of that happened in the last 3 weeks of time. We had them online with our own network leaders equipping time, and they spoke to us. And then we had an Indian woman who's been with us for 15 years. And the beautiful part about it is, they just shared what happened in their most recent journeys around the world. One was going through India. One, of course, I explained the areas already, I guess. So. But the beautiful part for us is they're an extension of our team. Their churches paid for everything. If you think about Romans 16 and 1 Corinthians 16, where Paul is listing the names of people and directing the traffic, that's what was happening. Is I was directing network traffic about this woman. Hey, go on ahead and go to these places in India with these networks, help in these particular areas, Latin America and these 4 or 5 countries here. In Albania, Kosovo, they had a large celebration event, and they celebrated the progress of a lot of the leaders, of church leaders that made it across the finish line of some theological training. So but they're part of the team, but they're not employees. And,
Goes back to where you started today.
and we didn't have people that, and their churches buy in and believe in the global movement. And so the church, like Paul's saying to the Thessalonians and to the churches in Corinth, Achaia, they're part of the work, even though the Corinth is probably never going to see Philippians and vice versa, but they're still part of the work, and they believe they're part of the work. So to hear from 4 different places around the world and all their different trips in the last 3 weeks, that all of them did, in a sense, from financially all on their own, but yet directing network traffic from the hub here.
Well, I think that's
a global team.
I think what you were trying to accomplish in that interaction and what I heard was that your role was to create that global team, that it was a network of networks, didn't depend on us. And we heard that they were independently working in their fields with us, excuse me, to accomplish the work. And how satisfying is that for you to reach that stage?
It shows the level of growth. I mean, there's room all over the place for that. It doesn't, you don't cap out at a number of employees. You don't cap out a number of contract workers. It's just language that just doesn't fit building a global team that stirs amongst. Because some of their time, I mean, we can expand it out and talk about 20 other people, 25 other people. Some of them are doing it 10% of their time. Some of them are doing it 90% of their time. And we don't, and again, they're not employees of an organization of ours. They're doing it because they're organizing their entire life around it, spending 90% of their time, energy, and money around it because they believe in what the New Testament text and paradigm is talking about.
And their story is, well, we had a podcast, you had a conversation with Chadwick, and coming out of megachurch and trying to build into their world the way of Christ the Apostle. We heard that again in the young lady from India and her world coming out of that sense of...
Young lady, she's 46.
That's what I said. It's all relative. But here she is coming out of that world knowing in her heart and soul that's not the right path. It wasn't satisfying, that journey that she was on to return to the way of Christ the Apostles.
Yeah, she didn't want to be just a crowd that gathers. She wanted to...
That was eloquent, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so,
what a morning, what a time that was. Because I think for me, we've seen it being built and we've seen it kind of from the inside. And so you deal with all the a little bit more of the details of it. But to our particular leaders to hear it and see it a little more fresher for them, and to see their response and their energy and their, like, wow, this is a vision that we've been talking about for years and years and years and years, and they see more of it happening. So it was wow, what an encouraging day.
in my generation, to actually be able to stay long enough to see spontaneous expansion of leaders and churches. But those leaders, the beauty of their voice, it was a song of praise, really, praising to God what He's doing in the world, and they're being a part of that. So, but on the same page of that sense of working around the world, we're also working on it here. And I edited a paper for you about our children and preparing our children. I know in the U.S., there's a lot of conversation going on around a generation being lost. They're not strong and able to survive the varieties of life, and the winds that blow are moving them as opposed to being able to stand and bend but not break. Contend, getting our youth to contend. Why did you write that paper, and what's motivating you, and what is it you want to accomplish?
2 reasons I wrote the paper situationally that happened. And one is the Petrine Circle of letters really impacted Contend for the Faith. 2 is because we've put a lot of emphasis on prioritizing the development of our third generation, those born after 1995 till about 2015. So that generation, really forming them to, we put energy and effort into developing them. So when you put the situation of the Petrine Circle in there, and then you look at our culture that we're in an anxiety culture. We've got some books here, Jonathan Haidt with The Anxious Generation, The Coddling of the American Mind. We've got a generation that really wants change and really feels empowered, feels maybe at times a little too autonomous, but they really want to know the why. But yet, so many are this anxious generation talks about how we as parents we're really in a culture where we want to create all this safety for people, and instead of being a gardener of them, and we end up being a carpenter where everything is so precise that we actually have not prepared them to have a complex state of mind in our changing culture. Instead, we've been a carpenter where everything's very precise, and so we end up being overly protective. The sociologists on those books, it's great research. It's some great resources that help inform us as a broad culture of what's happening. But the reason to write the paper then is to say we have to have a culture of building our third generation especially. So this is impacting parents and our churches, because our churches are responsible for our youth's growth in the faith. So not only do they need to have them receive the faith and believe the faith, and not only begin to discern the difference of a set of patterns in Christendom versus the way that Christ and his apostles wrote the letters, they also need to help them contend and struggle for and be united and have solidarity around a stewardship of this faith. So, because they're in a world where they're in a double bind.
Exactly. Their friends are going to try to pull them either back into tradition or away from the faith entirely.
Completely.
Exactly like the Petrine Circle.
Exactly like the Petrine Circle, and that's what's happening. Over these generations, we continually lose the next generation. People are not going to church services. People are not valuing Christ. They're not in the culture. They're not valuing a God. They're putting their value and purpose in other things. So those that stay in the Christian faith and those that are in the way of Christ and his apostles continually have the battle on each side is continuing to ramp up. A double bind.
And I know this is a constant battle of myself because I was a product of the old paradigm. I was a product of Christendom, and having to always evaluate what's coming out of my mind. Is it Christendom or is it the way of Christ and the apostles? And then to raise our kids, it should be something where we're putting them into the battle where we're still around them to provide some safety and help them. And I remember raising our kids, just a couple of years ago, nurture like a mother, exhort like a father. And, my wife was the first helicopter mother, I think. I said, if we don't let our kids get out there and get banged up, we can't teach them how to live life. And I think that's what you're really getting is these kids have to experience life in the challenges and the battle that they're facing, or they're not going to be prepared.
Yeah.
And they'll either follow the way of tradition, go back to what's comfortable, and that's not going to be satisfying.
Yeah.
Or just walk away completely.
Yeah, he has in the sociologist has a chapter 12. He splits it up and gives some guidelines for parents. And he splits it up 0 to 5, 6 to 12, 13 to 18. Which
sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Well, it's the Hebrew tradition
Yeah.
of segmenting that way. And he talks about in ages 6 to 12 that they really need to learn some basic things about human life, pain, embarrassment, shame, about being exposed to those things, learning those things, not in a healthy way, but you have to let them experience it, and not protect them from all those things, because that is real life. That is what humans do to each other, and they have to learn how to deal with that in healthy ways so that they can be productive members of our communities and of our societies altogether. So you combine understanding sociologically where our culture is, combined with the Petrine Circle, and it just is confidence inspiring. It's shining a light and telling us how we need to interpret the day we live in.
And how quickly it's changed. I know working at the university, would have never imagined that college students, adults, where we legally couldn't talk to their parents about their schoolwork, their parents would call and complain about their grade and try to get them changed. And I imagine if I would have asked my father to do that, he'd have laughed in my face.
Yeah.
But I remember it's those lessons. I remember I was probably early elementary going home and complaining to my father about being mistreated. He said, if you didn't create an environment where they expected you to act like that, they wouldn't be looking at you in that way. So you are just harvesting what you sowed.
Yeah.
And what a lesson that he didn't rescue me from the punishment that I received. He used it to teach me not to be anxious. You messed up, take it. And maybe not this time, but because of what you've done before, you have a reputation, you're going to pay that price.
Yeah.
And that's what really we're trying to accomplish, is being able to stand the attack.
Yeah.
And the world will beat us down if we're not ready for that. And even when we are ready.
We still have to continuously build that mind. My grandmother and my mother, my grandmother and my father, both would ask me similar phrases on the embarrassment, shame, some pain. They'd say things like, well, what do you think you've learned in this? And then they just stop and look at me. And it just...
And listen.
And they listen. But it was such a hard question for me to answer. But I soon realized that, and then they'd say, get to work. So they'd listen for a couple. But they wouldn't let me blame it on someone else, and they wouldn't let me just sit in the mud puddle. Well, I call it a mud puddle, but as a metaphor, but they wouldn't just let me sit in the mud and start slinging mud and start blaming other people. What do you think you've learned from this? So I'd try to articulate, try to think it through, just try to, I can remember some just real, I can see the situation, I can see the tree, I can see the buildings all around me, and I can see them standing there with their hands on their hips, asking me, and then I'd articulate something, and then we'd go to work. And then we'd talk back and forth about what I had tried to say to get more precise on what it actually is. I mean, those are things we need to be doing with everyone. That's the environment that people need to learn. People learn through dialogue, and that's what our churches should be. Everyone should have that opportunity to dialogue with older and younger, to sort their life out
and process it wisely.
Yeah.
You just took me back to 1977 or 78. I was standing right beside my car. It was a 1961 Chevy. And in one of my more challenging situations in life, my father just, man to man, we were both adults. He said, I think it's time you finish this. And it's like, yeah, you're right. It's that same thing. I was stuck in the puddle. And that's what we're trying to do for this generation.
Yep.
And I know it's hard as parents because we want to protect our children. You've experienced that, but you can't. You're going to be there to pick them up when they need to, but they have to get in the fight.
Yep,
we have to get their nose bloodied once or twice.
We have to be a gardener.
And then, of course, it's time to travel again, right?
Yeah.
It's, as one that gets to stay home, it's hard to send you off and not be able to go with you, but it's also really rewarding. I know you're getting ready to go to India and celebrate. And I know one of our other leaders just first trip to India. And as an older man, I'm so excited for him to get to experience that, but also to get to see the the real battle, that he can feel that when you step into India, where the darkness that you can feel in certain places, certain situations. That so what's coming up, and why are you headed to India?
Well, it makes me a little emotional. The journey continues.
First time I've ever done that made you emotional.
Yeah. I'm headed to India, and we're going to have two celebrations. This is the first of, we hope, annual celebrations. We had one a year and a half ago that kind of was a culmination of 5-6 years of work. This one is a culmination of 1 year. But we have networks. We're going to be in central India and southern India for these two. And the networks themselves are putting them on.
A call back to those leaders, network of leaders. They're doing so much work.
Yeah. And they're putting on the celebration. We're going to have a banquet feast. We're going to have food. We're going to celebrate recognition. We're going to recognize people that are, many people who are illiterate, who cannot read and write, but had made progress in the first principles and crossed a finish line, and recognize them. That some of them will be the first certificate they've received in their entire life. We'll have all the way up to people who have got their masters as a cultural currency. And so we'll celebrate that together, but we're going to do it around a meal. And we're going to do it as a family, as a global movement. We're going to have a lot of large Southeast Asian country leaders that are recorded some videos that we're going to hear from. Latin America is recording some videos. We got some people from Dubai that are with us that are recording some videos, all to greet them, all to encourage them, all to share a short story with them about their own. And so I feel like that's what's going to be happening, all funded by them. And so we get a stir amongst that. And then of course, those days where we have these banquet feasts and celebrations, they'll be pretty jam-packed days, but then the days before and after will be stirring amongst the different networks, traveling to Thessalonica, traveling to Galatia, traveling to these places. To
doing the foundational work that leads to this.
Yeah, doing the same work that Paul was doing and Peter were doing.
And then thinking back to the leaders we had join us a couple weeks ago, one of the images that it's beautiful, so beautiful, is maybe 8, 9 younger women, older women, and they had chairs, but they're all sitting on the floor. And the younger women were using their phones to translate the older women's work into written text so they could put it up on the cloud to get it evaluated. And not that it's, who cares if it goes on the cloud, but they had accomplished their own work and the sense of owning their own faith. Mm-hmm. They're being prepared to contend. What a beautiful picture.
Oh my goodness. That picture was to see those mothers who are illiterate and their daughters who are typing for them, but they're holding up the daughters are holding up on the phone their certificates that their mothers just received. Mm-hmm. So like just in time learning tools. They're learning in community with each other. It doesn't get any better than that. That's the simplicity of God's design. And
for me, it's easy to overlook the impact that has, because the way my map is not recognition. That's an annoyance to me almost.
Oh, yeah.
But to other people, that's very important. And the reaction, it's heartwarming.
Yeah.
That, as people have invested this work for generations, to see the fruit that's coming now. And they had just started, literally. This was such a short period of time, but they had a certificate. And the confidence, it's hard to wrap your head around really what that meant to them. Mm-hmm. And to get to be there, what a privilege. And I know conflicts out, fears within, the battles of the work. It's good to see it's almost a foreshadowing of that great feast to come. And thank you to the folks that you're going to visit, that they do that and welcome us in. Mm. And you're not employed, but you get some really good paydays. And this is one of them. So,
yeah, we'll see you on the other side
Yeah.
of these journeys, and we'll report and talk about, share what happened at these banquet feasts and celebrations. Look forward to talking about those.
yeah, that'll be our next report. I can't wait to come back again. So thank you, Michael. And as we continue on further up,
And further in.
thank you for joining us for our podcast, and look forward to you joining us next time.